Good. So I'd like to echo the sentiments of everyone before me, and what Berg said is, E, thank you for putting on the wonderful event and speaking in sushi. And it's a true testament to the love you have for Empire and the art of public speaking. So thank you. For me, I'm very humbled to be up here with everybody and my colleagues, just because I'm the first one in my family to graduate college. So I thank you in advance for listening to me and going over a little bit what I have to give to you guys today. So I'm a little bit under some scrutiny because I have a topic that's labeled ooh la la. So I'll make sure I deliver it to a good correlation of what we're doing all here today. So why did I pick Vidal Sassoon? No, it's not because everyone in this room thinks that they have a mean salad and that they go out every day and put their nice gel in and think they look good in the OR. It comes a little bit more from a personal story of mine. A man who I look up to and I actually admire, someone who I think is an older brother to me. His name's Ernest. And I see Ernest probably, I'd say, 2 to 3 weeks, every 2 to 3 weeks, and I sit down in his hairdressing chair because he's a stylist. And we go through our usual rant and rave of what happened during the weeks, how was your trip, how's work going. And a couple of months ago, I could tell that something was a little bit off. I was looking in the mirror, and I saw him, and it looked like something was on his mind, and I just didn't know what. So I said, E, what's up? He's like, well, what do you mean what's up? I'm like, you're just not the same today. What's going on? What are you thinking? He's like, well, someone who I admired passed away. I'm like, well, who did you admire that passed away? He's like, Vidal Sassoon. And I was like, oh, say that again? He's like, Vidal Sassoon passed away. And as he was continually speaking, he pretty much said this was a man who changed the world with a pair of scissors in his hand. Snip, snip, snip. And he's the person that made me want to open up my own salon and be a stylist that I am today. So it made me do a lot of research on Vidal Sassoon, and it also made me think this is a good challenge for me to public speak about a person who I don't know anything about. So if there's two themes that I can give you guys today to take away, or if I could say 2 words, they would be revolutionize, and the second word would be team. Now, before I get into a little bit more of those 2 words, I'd like to give you a little bit more of a backstory of who Vidal Sassoon was. Vidal Sassoon came from Jewish parents. His mother was from Spain and his dad was from Greece. And Vidal Sassoon, at the age of 3, his father left him. His father left his family. He was born in London, in Sheepshead Bush, London, which is on the east side of London. And unfortunately, his mother couldn't support him and his younger brother because if anyone knows anything about the early 30s, he was born in 1928, the Great Depression happened right around the time when he was born and he was growing up. So what did his mother do? His mother threw him in a Jewish orphanage from the age of 5 to 11. And Vidal was in a Jewish orphanage, and he really learned the roots of who he was and his heritage of being Jewish. So his mother was able to work and create a little bit more money, and at the age of 14, she had a premonition about Vidal being a great hairdresser. And at the age of 14, she walked Vidal down to the ghetto to a local barbershop by the man named of Adolf Cohen. And Adolf Cohen looked at Vidal and said, well, you need to pay if your son wants an apprenticeship as a hairdresser. And his mom really didn't have the money for that, and they had to leave. But as they left, Vidal was wearing a little cap, and he took his cap off, and he said, well, I thank you for the time you spent with me, trying, at least hearing me out and wanting the job. And at that moment, the guy said, wow, he's like, that's discipline at its finest. He's like, why don't you come Monday, and you'll have a job right away. So Vidal started with a man named Adolf Cohen at 14. And through his roots of having the heritage of being Jewish and creating what was going on now with Adolf Hitler leading into World War II, he became very fascist against the German regime. So he joined a group called the 43 Group. And what the 43 Group was is they revolted against any type of anti-fascism in London during the day. And Vidal was so touched by this movement that he said, you know what? I'm going to Israel. I'm fighting in the war of Israel, Israel's independence. And that's where Vidal really found himself. Really said, you know what? I have a calling in life, and I know what it's going to be. I enjoy hair, I've learned it, and this is what I want to do as a profession. So Vidal gets back to London in 1948, and he starts an apprenticeship under a guy named Raymond Besson. And Raymond Besson was a very flamboyant man. He was a very appealing man. He got all of the ladies, and he knew how to style hair. And Vidal did an apprenticeship under Raymond Besson for 6 years, from 1948 to 1954. And what was interesting about Raymond Besson for Vidal was that Raymond was the true leader and pioneer of how to use the scissors. And that's where Vidal learned how to use his scissors. But there was something missing for Vidal. He looked at what Raymond did with women's and men's hairs and said, this has to change. I have to revolutionize what's going on in the industry of hair. Because during the day of the 40s and 50s, what happened was, with women, and maybe Maren can attest to this, is that they would go in hair sets. So a woman would have to go to the salon every week. And they would have to sit in those big dryers that they put their hair under for 45 minutes. And they would sit under that, and then once they're done with that drying, they would then go over to the seat, and then they would sit down. And then sometimes they would have to get their hair combed out, and they would have to have a sculpture of a hair that looked perfect. And they couldn't really touch that hair for that next week until they went into that salon the following week. So Vidal looked at that and said, this can't be. I can't have women's hair looking like this anymore. So what did he do? Vidal was very big, and one of his loves in life was architecture. And unfortunately, he never went to college. So he admired architecture, and what he said was, you know what? I want the geometry of a woman's hair and the angles of a woman's hair to match their face and to match their bone structures. And I want them to wake up in the morning, and shake their hair, and it would fall naturally into the position of what is called a 5-point cut. And I'll show you that in a little bit. So Vidal was able to gather up a little bit of money, and in 1954, he was able to open up his own salon. And his own salon was only 700 square feet, but he was happy because he knew that he was going to change and revolutionize an industry. So when Vidal got his salon in 1954, he claims that the next 9 years, from 1954 to 1963, was his age of discovery. His age of truly revolutionizing what women's hair and men's hair could be in the future. So when I look at women's hair, and I'll show you a small example of the 40s and 50s to the 60s and 70s where Vidal took it. Raymond Besson, he did some hair that looked like this.
Nice.
I kid you. I had to give it back to Eric for the ooh la la skit that he pulled off of me. But the 40s and 50s looked like this, right? So that's something that's called a hair set. Very proper and dainty. Vidal then switched hair to the 60s and 70s like this. This is Grace Coddington. Grace Coddington in the 60s and 70s was a famous model back in the day. She was on the covers of Vogue, in Europe and in America. And then this one, Eric, maybe you would know for no apparent reason, but this is Nancy Kwan. Nancy Kwan was a famous actress back in the 60s and 70s. And actually this photo was what put Vidal Sassoon over the top in the late 60s. Nancy Kwan, as you can see, was in the cover of Vogue in the late 60s. I don't recall what year, it was like 68 or 69. And she was in Vogue in England, and everyone loved this picture so much that it went straight from France to Italy and then to America. So, as you can see from the 40s and 50s, Vidal was able to transform hair with women. Now, in that 9-year span, when Vidal was rediscovering hair and transforming hair, The 60s was a time where also women were able to be liberated a little bit more. Vidal had that hair form. But he also teamed up with a lady called Mary Quant, who then discovered the miniskirt. So you have a true transformation of women coming from the 40s and 50s, being very conservative, and then going into the 60s and 70s where now women's hair matched the face of the structure of their face, and they were able to wear miniskirts. Okay. Also, in that 9-year period, as you may know, he didn't do it on his own. Right? So in that 9-year period, he had novices and apprentices that truly studied underneath him.